Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, and once again, this is Legal Matters, the program that's been designed to address the critical and sometimes contentious issues that are facing businesses and consumers. It's legal information, practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of topics that will affect your home and work life. We, once again, from Audette, Bazar, Cordeiro, Grasso law firm in East Providence, welcome Jackie Grasso and David Bazar. Thank you for being with us. In past segments, we've talked about bankruptcies and finances and certainly foreclosures. And while month to month, we certainly still see and know that we're in a foreclosure crisis, today we're going to address the other kind of foreclosure crisis, namely the one that means you could lose your home over as little as $400 if it were $400 in back taxes or sewer taxes. As we've known very recently, for all of Rhode Island's foibles, Rhode Island had been a champion of Madeline Walker some years ago, and in fact, because of her, we've had a great benefit in terms of keeping bad things from happening to good people. So it starts with tax liens. One of the things that we need to discuss today, tax liens, unpaid taxes. What exactly is a tax lien? How does it happen?
Well, we know that everybody has to pay taxes in life, so if you own a piece of property, you have to pay your property taxes. If you fail to pay your property taxes to the city or town, then the tax collector has the right to force a sale on the property.
So I know we're primarily talking about taxes that are based on what we commonly call real estate taxes, taxes due to the city or town that you live in. Other tax liens could arise. For example, if somebody dies, there's an automatic estate tax lien that's on your property until you file the forms with the state to show that either there's no tax due or the tax is paid.
Well, that happens automatically.
It's an automatic lien. Correct.
It automatically is leaned against the property.
Right. And so if you went to sell your house and the buyer did a title search and saw that one of the owners of the property died and there was no release from the state for the estate tax that may or may not be owed, there would be an automatic lien, so the forms would have to be filed.
And generally speaking, it's quite easy to release the lien unless your estate is over, what is it, 875?
Yeah, it's a floating number based on some changes, but 700 to 800,000, say over 800 now. If your estate is worth less than that, you file the forms to show what it's worth, and
it just gets released. Yeah.
The good news, of course, is you're supposed to have some sort of warning before these things happen right from under your feet. So if we back up just a little bit, and I had alluded to the Madeline Walker case, I guess I can say back in 2005, under Governor Kucheri, my husband, Steve Cass, was involved with Madeline Walker, who was about to be turned out of her home because her sewer taxes or her sewer payment wasn't made. That is terribly unrealistic, and as a result, it took time, but they kept her from being turned out, and now there is the Madeline Walker Act. Do you want to
that's named after, of course, Madeline Walker was a little 81-year-old woman. I think she was living alone at the time.
I think so.
And she may have had some dementia or not, but you know, they noticed her that she had her taxes that were unpaid, the sewer taxes. As a result of failure to pay, then they sold her property for a bill that amounted to $496.
Now, just by way of making a little differentiation between that and the original taxes I was talking about, the estate tax, the state doesn't come in and sell your real estate for estate tax.
No.
Unless you file the return and then it's not paid and you go through a whole nother process. This is, or was at 2005, sewer taxes that were due. Or if it were real estate taxes that were due, you get notice that you owe the bill. There's money now that's known to be due and owing, and if it wasn't paid, there's a process to actually sell the property out from under you.
Yeah, the state statute provides that they have to be given notice.
Right.
It has to be published a certain amount of time prior to the sale. So what ended up happening with Madeline Walker, as you know, is your husband was working for then Governor Kucheri, was outraged by this, obviously,
Right.
and this poor little woman,
$496.
She was pretty much homeless. So legislation arose, and they ultimately passed this bill, which secures the person for staying in the house. Let me back up. It provides notice to Rhode Island Housing. So if somebody is going to be sold at tax sale, the law requires that The taxing authority give notice to the Rhode Island Housing Authority that there's going to be a lien and a tax sale. Then the Rhode Island Housing Authority will be able to either investigate it, provide funds, or whatever steps it takes to keep the person in the house, provide counseling to the person. But it's more of a notice to the Rhode Island Housing than anything else.
And that gives Rhode Island Housing the opportunity to step in
Yeah.
and see if they can do something to remedy the problem before the tax sale happens. Does it apply to both real estate taxes and sewer taxes?
Yeah.
Or just sewer?
No, both.
Both. Interestingly enough, Rhode Island Housing then sends a note that says, how can we help you, or may we be of assistance? But theoretically, they sent this note to Mrs. Walker first. Maybe they sent 40. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of that. But clearly, if she is an elderly woman, she did have a bank account. I do recall that. But the point was, for whatever reason, there's a disconnect. She doesn't read her mail. She's just not of sound mind to follow through on these things. The fact that the Madeline Walker Act came into play meant that now there's some intercession before this happens.
Rhode
There's
Island
more
Housing.
time now, is there not?
Yes, Rhode Island Housing has to be notified. And in fact, even prior to the act, the state statute provides that if there is a tax abatement in the city or town because of person's age, if the person's elderly, then the Department of Elderly Affairs has to be noticed as well.
Right. So what Jackie's talking about there is most towns have abatement for someone being over a certain age. Some towns have abatements for military service.
With disabilities.
Or
Homestead
other
in some
disabilities,
towns, disabilities. And if you were getting an abatement for being elderly, then before the town would sell your property at tax sale, it seems that there is some requirement in the statute that the Department of Elderly Affairs be noticed so they could provide some intervention.
That's right.
What happens for, say, the Latino families who move in, or others who are less well educated, I don't know, some of those who are just more vulnerable for whatever reason? Do they also have the benefit of Rhode Island Housing swooping in and assisting them, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think under the Rhode Island Walker Act, they still have to be notified. Rhode Island Housing still has to be given advance notice.
And what if, despite the fact that you should have received these notices, suppose it really wasn't your fault and you didn't? This was an interesting thing. The fact is, you didn't receive that notice. Something happened. For example, I can say that when I became owner of a home, but I wasn't living in the home, even though the town should have known and I had given them the address to send that tax bill, they didn't have it. They didn't send it to me. How could I
Remember
pay
what
it?
happens a lot of times when you buy a home and you buy it after December 31st of the previous year, the bill may be assessed to and sent to the registered
Right.
owner on the date of December 31st or whatever date the town or city uses for its assessment. And so oftentimes tax bills will get sent to the wrong person, and of course it's the owner's responsibility that you have to pay taxes is to contact them, find out what the taxes that are due are, and make the payments. But there's a little bit of protection if you don't make your payment and it goes to a tax sale and you don't get all the notices before the person who buys it can actually have full ownership or title to the property. They have to redeem your right of foreclosure. Or foreclosure right of redemption, I should say.
Let's explain that. I can tell you, I did some research on it, and even with a college degree, that's a slow slog. How does the average person who isn't so familiar with it, how do they possibly wade
to
through that?
understand.
Why don't you explain?
Well, your right of
the
redemption
411?
is the original owner's ability to actually take the property back. I'm kind of putting it in layman's terms.
Yes.
Take the property back, and you have up to 1 year to do that. So you're going to take it back for the price that the person bought the tax lien, plus up to a 10 or 11% penalty. So there are a lot of people out there that are buying these tax liens like in bulk and making a lot of money off
Right,
that.
it's an investment for them, and what they're doing is they're paying the taxes. Then if the owner gets notice that they didn't pay their taxes and that it's been sold, and now this lawsuit has been filed to foreclose that right of redemption, they can answer the case, but the judge will have to listen to the case and decide how much money they're going to have to pay on top of the taxes that were originally owed, and perhaps additional taxes that may have been paid, interest, penalties, and counsel fees.
But the state statute also provides that you have 1 year for the redemption. After that 1 year, then the purchaser of that tax
Files
seal
this-
can file the right
right.
to foreclose with the
Right.
Superior Court.
Of
Correct.
course, with what you're laying out for us right now, the idea is that you're going to give us the information and also how to protect ourselves from the municipalities as well as some of these predators. What should someone do when they've already been served this notice? I would imagine that automatically they have to call a lawyer because they couldn't possibly wade through all of this. So what steps do you go through to intercept and avoid them from them having such problems?
You want to communicate, you
Catastrophes.
don't want to ignore.
Right.
Okay, that's the biggest problem that I see a lot of times. People have financial hardship,
They
and
just
instead of
ignore
dealing
it.
with it, they just ignore it. They take the bills, they toss them in the trash, understandably so, because they're just despondent over the fact they don't have any money, they're going to lose their home. So you have to keep the lines of communication open. Go over to the tax assessor's office or the tax collector's office. Make arrangements to pay. They're not going to sell it if you're making arrangements to pay and you're paying according to whatever your schedule is. But keep the lines of communication open, because if you turn your head to it, then you know what's going to
That's
happen.
step number one, and the most important step to avoid this whole process kicking in. So as Jackie said, as long as you're in contact with the tax collector of the town that you live in, and they know you're making a good faith effort to put a plan in place and follow the plan, they don't want to sell your house at tax sale, they just want to get paid.
Well, then, I assume because the economy is still faltering, more people are losing jobs and falling
happening
short.
a lot.
So you'd expect that that kind of crisis could continue. Do you mean to suggest then that if someone went to their town hall, North Providence or Warren, and they said, I don't have my $800 quarterly payment, I have $200, and maybe in a week and a half I might get you another $150 more, would that absolutely avoid all
Yes.
of this problem?
Sure it will. Sure.
Clearly.
It'll delay it for sure.
Yeah, it'll delay it. Look, I don't think the cities and towns want to be in the business of selling properties for a $2,000
Right.
unpaid tax bill or a $500 unpaid sewer bill.
And they don't want you falling years behind. So if you have a shortfall for a short period of time that you're going to say, I'm going to be behind for a little period of time, or I'm already behind, but I have a plan to work my way out of it, that's going to be okay.
Does that end up being subjective, David?
I don't think it's subjective. I think that there's some rules that they have to put to bear on each case. You know, there may be some rules and regulations in each town as to how far behind you can get. A lot of folks have fallen behind because
14 days.
Right.
That's what the statute says.
That's exactly
14
correct.
days.
Now,
But they're not going
They
to.
can make a demand within 14
That's right.
days, then if it remains unpaid, then they can proceed.
Yeah, it's not going to go to a tax sale in 14 days,
No,
but the
but they have to
demand
give
can
you-
start,
yeah.
and the rules can kick in. What I was going to say, though, is a lot of people have fallen behind because they are behind on their mortgages,
Everything.
and they escrow the taxes, and so now they're not getting paid.
But in that case, though, if the taxes are escrowed, then the mortgage company would pay the taxes for you.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, and then they would tack
But
it onto your...
now you owe it back to the
to
mortgage company.
Yeah, just like insurance,
Right.
you know.
then they're still likely or possibly inclined to foreclose themselves if you're not paying your mortgage.
That's right,
That's
but
another
see, with
story.
the mortgage,
Well,
you have investors that have to protect their interests.
And the mortgage companies are behind not only on what hasn't been paid to them for the principal and interest, but the money they've paid out. So you'll see a negative escrow balance because they paid money out to keep the house from being behind on its taxes, for
If there's a
example.
lien holder on a property, of course, the owner of the property would get notice of a tax delinquency, the lien holder of the property would get notice on the tax delinquency. So at some point, you know, somebody's got to
Right.
take some action.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you a question that's more along the lines of compliance right now. With the current mortgage crisis, then compliance becomes even more of an issue, and the truth in lending, I guess, means that someone has to be very forthcoming in the details of what you have to pay. What do the borrowers have to say, and what are the terms to keep them from having, never mind 3 months, but 3 more years or 30 more years or whatever that extension is?
Well, your mortgage documents provide that if you fail to pay taxes or insurance, then they can accelerate the loan and default you and
Right.
foreclose. Same thing with a car loan.
It's just as much of a violation or default of your agreement
Yeah.
not to pay the money being escrowed as it is not to pay the principal and interest that's due.
You know, I think maybe a solution down the road would be maybe the cities and towns taking more of a active role in collecting the taxes. For instance, instead of just sending out letters, why don't you have collectors in your office that are calling people up? So that you have a line of communication open, you can find out what's going on. I don't know if there's enough money in the city budgets to do that, but I mean, when I worked in a bank doing collections, that's what I did. You know, if
Yes.
somebody was delinquent on a mortgage, let's call the borrower, let's find out what's going on, let's put them on a payment plan. So why not the cities and why can't the cities and towns?
It may cost a little bit of
Yeah,
money to the
sure.
town, but it might save a lot of money because it may be a simple, Madeline Walker didn't
yeah.
realize she owed the money, perhaps that was the problem, or she had the money and hadn't realized she hadn't sent it in or something.
Somebody's not getting their mail for whatever
Right.
reason.
My understanding is if they have one or two times that they're supposed to be sending out a letter, the banks, when they have their truth in lending compliance issues, say, never mind if you don't send that information out about what the parameters or what the terms are within 90 days, then never mind they have 3 months, they end up having, that borrower ends up having 3 years. So I guess someone is being hypervigilant about making sure you know what the terms are, and we're making a very serious effort to make sure you know so that you're not behind the 8 ball, which is clearly what's happened with people like Madeline Walker.
Well, the nice thing about the Madeline Walker Act is now that the housing authority is notified, they can actually purchase the tax lien. So they can buy the tax lien, or the taxing authority can sell it to the Rhode Island Housing Authority, and then the Rhode Island Housing Authority will be proactive.
Yeah, they
suppose,
can
and
work with the owner
homeowner.
to try to keep them in the house, work something out with them, or move them along somewhere if that's
So
what's
they
in
have
their
the right
best
of first
interest.
refusal. That's
Sort of,
basically
yeah,
what it is,
so to
almost.
speak.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the predators, those terrible people who like to buy the tax liens, and of course they make a lot of money at it. Watch the late night cable shows and you'll see that there are the get rich quick schemes that say you can be part of this, and certainly by putting in a little money you can make a lot in a very fast period of time. But certainly it's fraught with problems when the tax sale issues and those who are involved with it get involved. Go through what some of those problems are and how we should be aware, what we need to be aware of.
Well, before you go into that, it's sort of
You
hard
have
to
another-
call somebody a predator
Okay.
who's following the rules.
Yeah.
And the cities and towns in a good economy, when they're not getting paid, want to get paid. So
Yes.
those rules are in place so the city and town can get paid. So you can't call somebody a predator who's just
Okay.
following the rules.
I was
Right?
being editorial,
I
I
know you
admit.
But what you're saying is it seems to be the same individual
Well,
or
there are
individuals who are
people who
purchasing
use
these
this as a way of
liens.
investment. That's
Yeah.
an investment they understand, they know, so they follow it. But you can go ahead and talk about some of the problems of that investment.
Well, I think what a predator may do is fail
aware.
fail to notify, fail to notify, or maybe deliberately fail to notify the owner of the property that they purchased it at tax sale.
And then do they have a compliance issue because they
Sure they
didn't?
do,
As
yeah.
long as you, but here's the issue.
If somebody's
If they
down and
didn't
out,
know-
they don't have the money to fight it, you know?
But if someone didn't even know that what I refer to as the predator or that very smart investor, if you
Yeah.
will, that if the borrower or that person who's in that predicament doesn't know about the compliance issues, then very likely they're going to be taken advantage of. So,
Yeah.
of course, I'm asking you, help us beware of what your rights are if you happen to be on that short end of the stick.
Again, you have that 1-year right of redemption, okay? Unless the purchaser takes an active role, the purchaser of the tax lien, they have to file a petition to foreclose after that 1 year. I mean, it could take them 2 years to file the petition to foreclose, but if they never file that petition to foreclose in Superior Court, then the original owner still remains the original owner of that property, even though somebody has purchased that tax lien, okay?
But we can really mess a title up if the purchaser of the original tax lien doesn't pay the taxes.
And that's
Now-
what
right.
happened to the gentleman who I spoke with in my office.
Oh, yeah. So it really clouds the title, and
Yeah.
now how do you
It's
clear
added
that one up?
Well, that's a real title nightmare, yeah.
From your perspective as lawyers, from what I've read in other states, never mind Rhode Island, which championed Madeline Walker Act, apparently lawyers are put in a very peculiar place, some very complicated issues when someone wants to be the buyer of those tax liens. they could be, there, I guess, is a history of some fraudulent behavior.
Oh, yeah.
If I were to come to you and say, Jackie, I own this, I bought this, please help me implement this. In fact, you may not always know that I am who I say I am, and I'm collecting money and you're helping me do it. And that certainly is an issue that across the country they're grappling with, fraudulent issues with the tax liens.
It's almost akin to the foreclosure crisis, where banks are foreclosing on properties when they didn't even follow compliance rules with assignment of titles. So before,
the note was never assigned.
it was never assigned, it was never recorded. Now what you're finding is right before foreclosure starts, you go search the title, and bingo, there's the assignment of title that's recorded.
Right.
That should have happened 7 years prior.
Right.
So, until somebody gets wise to that and starts becoming active, taking an active role in fighting it, it's going to continue to happen.
On what websites are there that will inform someone about the fact that they could be in trouble if they perhaps didn't get the notice that they should have, or apparently it's either the city or the state?
City or town, yeah.
What about the state? Would be a different real estate
Well, the
tax
state
issue?
doesn't tax real estate. That's
City or
a
town.
city or town.
City or
It's
towns
local.
first.
Right.
But you can just Google tax liens by state, and they'll give you a list of, they'll cite the law, and it'll also give you a list of the redemption periods by state.
There can be other tax liens that are issues. We've been primarily
Yeah,
focusing on
property
real
taxes.
estate property tax. But, if you don't pay the IRS what they're due, and they go through their process, they can file a lien on your property, and now that's dealt with just like any other creditor's lien
The
in many
difference,
ways.
though, with the IRS in the state of Rhode Island is they can just slap the lien without, they they
Right.
do give you notice, but with a regular creditor, they have to go to court and they have to get
Right.
a judgment and then get an execution to serve the lien.
Right, but my understanding,
Yeah.
what it's saying is it's treated in a similar manner, is that there's no process for automatically
Yes.
selling the lien
Yeah,
and having
that's
your
correct.
property taken from you.
What happens if you happen to be the apartment renter and the person who owns the three-family apartment, three-family home, doesn't pay his tax, sewer bill, whatever, and there's the tax lien sale, someone else has the deed and says, I'm sorry, you'll have to leave. What does that renter
Leave,
have?
Or who do you pay your rent
Or who do
to?
you pay your
Well,
rent to?
unless
what happens
that
then?
petition for foreclosure is filed after that 1-year period, I think the original owner still is entitled to the rent.
Yeah, they still have the deed in their name. It's a possibility that they'll
Yeah.
lose the property,
Yeah.
but they have the ability to redeem, so they may not. So it's a little complicated, but I agree with Jackie. I think the original owner still is the actual owner.
And even after the right to foreclose, if there's a lease, the lease is going to follow the purchase, the foreclosure.
Right.
You can't just terminate a lease because you have a new owner.
That's good for someone to know if
Yeah,
that's
it's
true.
interesting, though. If the mortgage is foreclosed, for example,
Yeah.
does that, in the lease came afterwards and it's not recorded, does the mortgage wipe out that interest in the property? I haven't thought that one all the way through. I'm not
Topic
100%
for another
sure.
show.
Sounds like that'll be
Yeah.
another show. I was just going to ask you another question about three-family homes, two-family homes, and
If it's a multifamily home, then by law, Rhode Island Housing has to be notified,
And is-
even prior to this Madeline Walker Act.
and then what happens in Massachusetts?
Well, Massachusetts, if somebody's elderly or disabled, then there cannot be a tax sale. Okay, you're prohibited from, cities or towns prohibited from tax sales if somebody has a homestead for elderly, or if you're was 61 or 62 or disabled. So therefore, the taxes would be paid eventually when there's a sale of a home, if there's a death
death,
or something
yeah.
like that. But there is a statute in Massachusetts that prohibits that. If you're not elderly, then similar to what we have here
So
in Rhode Island.
the older person who can't afford to pay the taxes will accrue. They're
Correct.
still owed to the city or town, they're not forgiven.
Yeah.
However, they won't take the house, and they'll get paid, as Jackie said,
Sell
upon
later.
sale
Yeah.
or death.
Yeah, maybe that's something they should do in the state of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
How about,
Get Mr. Cass on that.
how about the little-known, or I guess it's little-known, as I was reading and preparing for this, how many people, I wonder, would know that after their house has been, this tax sale has taken place, and the tax has been met, that they're entitled to the difference,
The surplus.
that surplus. If you didn't have a lawyer who was vying for you or speaking on your behalf, how would you possibly know that instead of being behind the 8 ball, $10,000, you could actually just have a little nest egg of 196 or 215 or whatever it is?
I think it's
215,000.
probably fairly rare that somebody pays more than the taxes that are due.
I think what she's saying is if the property's foreclosed on and there's a surplus of funds, then what happens to the surplus?
Right.
Because the statute provides that if there's a surplus, it goes to the city or town. Person, the
They have the
original
right to
owner.
get it back.
That's right. They have to make a demand. If they don't make that demand within 5 years, then the money inures back to the city or town.
Right.
What a windfall is
Interesting.
that for
Yeah.
poor little Madeline Walker who lost her house for $500.
Now, in the matter of compliance, when it comes to lenders, they are bound and beholden to tell you these are the terms. Does the city which caused the problem in the first place, do they also have the burden of telling that homeowner, we're going to give you about $200,000 because there's a surplus? Is there a law or is there a compliance issue that they have to adhere to?
I don't know that the city or town has to
I don't think there's
Buyer beware?
buyer beware.
Yeah, but
And maybe they do give them notice that
They might.
says, we have.
I think they might because it's so rare that it happens. I believe it's very rare that
I've
that
actually
happens.
had a client who had a home foreclosed on, and this is way back when the real estate market was liquid.
Mm-hmm.
So the house was foreclosed on, and there was an excess of 50 or 60,000. He had no idea
Well, and
because
that would
nobody knows
happen-
what the sale of the home
Back
happens.
then, that would happen more often because the way that auction works is you're raising the price.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure that that's how a tax sale
little different.
foreclosure, that usually you're taking a smaller percentage of interest in the property
Mm-hmm.
for the amount that you're paying for the taxes, and they only collect the amount that's due.
In the very short time that we have left, let's assume now you are working on behalf of the person who does want to be the tax lien buyer. What kinds of things do they need to be aware of? I hear there's an as-is issue about what you're buying.
Sure, because you're not going to be able to get into the home to see what you're buying,
Yeah,
I
there's
think
no home inspection clause in the tax sale statute.
So what do you, if you're representing a client who
Well,
wants
if I
to do it, what would you
represent somebody
say?
that does that, I want to make sure that he or she complies with the state statute. In the
Right.
way they're going to buy it, you have a right of redemption, give notice to the original owner, comply with the notice requirements. You have to file a deed for taking after you purchase the tax lien.
You have to give notice to all the people who have an interest, the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act,
Correct. Yeah,
guardians.
that's a different story
Yep.
too. If somebody's in active duty in the military,
Right.
you hadn't even talked about that.
But the person doesn't have an option to go into the house, but they can take a look at what's going on by a plat number, I assume, if nothing else. How do you know that the pipes haven't been taken out
You
or
don't.
whatever?
You don't.
You don't.
But you could
Buyer
also,
beware.
one other thing you need to do is just maybe check the title and what other liens or other issues there might be on the property
And someone
legally,
could do that themselves as opposed to having a lawyer do
if
it,
they know how.
if they know how.
Oh, yeah.
It's all buyer beware.
Right.
Well, we appreciate your tuning in. Again, we thank our attorneys Jacqueline Grasso and David Bazar from Audette, Bazar, Cordeiro, Grasso law firm in East Providence. We hope that this public outreach effort has been helpful to you. We'd like to thank our producer Kathy and Kenny. And if you have a suggestion or a topic, legalmatters@fullchanneltv.net is where you would want to send an email. Thank you again for watching. We hope that you'll be with us when we have our next session. The discussion of legal matters will continue.